Hello, welcome to Local Lives. Today we're over at the Iniskim Centre at Mount Royal University, and we're joined by the special guest.
Hi, good morning. My name is Tori McMillan, and I am the interim director here at the Iniskim Centre.
Can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yes, so my background is Anishinaabe. I'm a member of Barons River First Nation in Treaty 5, and so I acknowledge that I'm a visitor here in the lands of Treaty 7 and the Métis Nation. My work here in the Iniskim Centre is to support Indigenous academic success, and our home here in the centre supports students at Mount Royal University.
So, what brought you over to Calgary?
While growing up, my mother was an educator, and so we were following where the work was. And so growing up in Saskatchewan, we made our way west to Alberta. I moved here when I was very young, and my experiences moving to Calgary are often shared by people that I meet today when they come to the city and they realize the size of the city and the vastness of, things like the transit system. So these are experiences that I also remember as a newcomer to Calgary once.
Probably grown quite a bit since you first came.
Absolutely, yeah, the city has changed so much. I came to Mount Royal myself as a student back in 1996, and so in the context of change, I've seen so much happen here, even within the campus. So for me to have started as a student and now to be back in a position where I'm supporting other students, and I have my children here at Mount Royal, it's very special to me.
What was it that inspired you to come back to the Iniskim Centre?
It was education. For me, I really have to be grateful that everything I have in my life is centered around education, and knowing the power that it held for me and the difference it made for me, it inspired me to be in a space where I can work with others that are on a similar journey. What I found out is what many students are finding out is, as first generation learners, we need to find community and supports outside of our traditional family. And this is why centers like the Iniskim Centre exist, to create a surrogate family in an institutional setting.
How long have you been working here?
So I came here, it'll be almost 13 years to the day. I started in July 2010. My first role was to support students in what was known as the Aboriginal Education Program. It's now known as the Indigenous University Bridging Program. This program supports our transitional learners or students who are upgrading. In the past few months, I've been given the opportunity to become the interim director of the Iniskim Centre, which means I still work with our bridging program students, but now my focus also has grown to consider the needs of the staff here and our partnerships within the university. So it's really giving me a chance to expand and build our relationships on campus.
How has it been to watch the centre grow over these 13 years?
It's been wonderful. It really is parallel to the journey we're seeing in Canada today around reconciliation. So we could see a landmark shift here in Mount Royal with the release of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission's calls to action. We took those calls and we created an Indigenous strategic plan to give us guidance and structure for the work we're doing. This is truly an unprecedented time in Canadian history because there is no blueprint for reconciliation. This is an open-ended process, and so both our Indigenous and non-Indigenous partners are working together to find a new path, which when we look historically, we're actually returning back to agreements and treaties that were negotiated long ago, but somehow along the way they lost their meaning, they lost their focus, they lost their intent. And now we're in a position today to restore that balance and to give our communities their rightful place within university again.
How important is it to hold that space within the education system for Indigenous students?
It's extremely important, and it's not lost on us that the work of the staff in the centre here is essentially to restore trust between our communities and education institutions. Mount Royal has been a very willing and active partner in reconciliation efforts. And one example of that would be the Bridging Program, which is celebrating its 30th anniversary this year. So for 30 years, we have had a partnership in place that provides access and support for students who want to go to university, but they're looking for first steps. Who do I talk to? Where do I go? The same questions that I was asking myself all those years ago. And now I'm on the other side of the desk, walking that journey with our students today.
Did you have access to the Iniskim Centre when you were going to university?
Not here at Mount Royal. The Iniskim Centre started in 2007, so I predated that by a little bit. But I will say when I was a student at the University of Calgary, yes, I did have a home there in the Native Student Centre. I think it's now called the Four Directions Lodge. And it's important that these spaces exist. To my understanding, the first Indigenous presence on a post-secondary in Canada was in 1969 at Trent University in Ontario. The Indigenous students created a society to have space and community, and now that's grown to become more university supported through centers like Iniskim and at the U of C.
How important is it for that representation within education?
It's critically important, and there's a historical reason why there has been a separation between Indigenous peoples and formal education systems. It's actually something that many people don't fully understand or appreciate, and it wasn't until I did some research that I came across a book by Blair Stonechild. Back in 2007, he wrote a book about called The New Buffalo. And in that, he described the history of Indigenous education in Canada. And what surprised me, in fact, I'll go a step further and say what shocked me, was when he described the Indian Act being created in 1876. One of the original clauses that was added to that act said, quote, "Indians are forbidden from attending university," end quote. And the implication was that if you left your community to go into the city and get an education, you would be disenfranchised, so you would lose your status, and you would be prohibited from going back to your people. So when given the option of staying with your community or going into an unknown, hostile environment that you can't get out of, it's understandable why there was a separation. And that separation lasted for 50, 60 years. Really, what changed the tone of that was World War II, to be honest. Our Indigenous community members were not drafted, they volunteered. And when they came back from service, the government was offering education to all of the veterans. Well, the veterans said, this is wrong. You know, they fought with us, they died with us, they should have access to education as well. And then they said, yes, it was actually in the treaties that education is our treaty right. So we're going to exercise that now. We're going to stand up and challenge those policies. So this started back in the 1950s. A few brave people left their communities to come into these spaces to be the first. And I describe them as our trailblazers. They walked a path. They started the footsteps. And today, 60 years later, we're widening that path with every generation of students that come here. That's our work, is to build on the people that came before us and to make it more welcoming, more inclusive for those who come after us. What I'm most proud of is that today at Mount Royal, our graduation rates for our Indigenous students are almost identical to our non-Indigenous students. What that essentially means is that for every 3 people who walk in the door, 2 are walking out with their degree, and that includes our Indigenous students. So for me, the message of that is that our students are capable. It was never about ability, but it's about opportunity. And that's what the Iniskim Centre, that's what these spaces represent for our community members, opportunity.
Do you have any advice for any Indigenous who are looking to take that step forward for post-secondary school?
Absolutely. We get the opportunity to interact with tour groups, with youth groups, with high schools, communities both within Treaty 7 and around Turtle Island. We have people that are interested in university. And where we are situated is that welcoming face to welcome them in, to sit down with them and explain the complexity of this area. What I found recently is a framework, an Indigenous framework known as Two-Eyed Seeing. This was coined back in 2004 by Albert and Betty Marshall, two elders from Eskasoni First Nation in New Brunswick. They were looking at ways to understand Indigenous and non-Indigenous ways of knowing. And they came up with this concept of two-eyed seeing as a way to recognize that Indigenous ways of knowing are a strength and Western ways of knowing are a strength. And when we bring the two together ethically, we have depth perception, more than we would have if we were just looking through one lens that we were born with. We're taking that understanding now and bringing it into the academic world and saying, how can we bridge these two worlds? How can we find common space? And Iniskim Centre, I would say, would be one of those examples of two-eyed seeing where Western knowledge and Indigenous knowledge are coming together.
I'm wondering, how important is it, do you feel, for non-Indigenous students to hold that space in education for Indigenous students?
That's important too. We recognize that as a space, we need to be open and accessible. And I have to give all the credit to our students. Several years ago, I remember sitting in my office and I could overhear some students in the lobby of the Iniskim Centre, and a non-Indigenous student walked in, and the students stopped reading and they greeted that visitor and talked to them and had a conversation. And when the student left, then the area got quiet again. But I needed to come up and acknowledge what I had overheard. So I came out and I said, hey, everybody, I just want to say I heard you talking with that visitor. I really appreciated that you did that. Well, why did you all stop what you were doing and greet that person? And they told me, Tori, we know what it feels like when we are not welcome in spaces. We are not going to do that here. This is our space, but we welcome others into our space. And when I heard that, my heart melted, It said that this is the best of who we are. And even in spite of all the hardships that have been endured, we still share the best of who we are. We offer the best of who we are through this space. So this is why we say it's our student-led center. What the students ask for is what we do. Whether that's a policy or a resource, they're the ones that set the tone because it gives them ownership for the space, and it gives them a sense of pride to belong to something bigger than them.
How big of a part of academic success do you think that plays?
It plays a significant part in our students' success, and that's why our center was centered around the bridging program as the first way for us to connect with our students. So over the years, we've heard from our students what other needs that they bring to us. So this is why we've developed other programs to support students, whether it's through living on campus, whether it's through mentorship, or the traditional forms of support like advising, class registration, things of that nature. Many times students will seek us out because they don't know where to go on campus. But if they know there's an Indigenous center, they'll start there and then build out from that space. So that's why we let our students know, no matter what program you're in, what year of study you're in, what nation you belong to, this is your home here. And all we ask for you is to share your story with other people, because you have a voice and you have influence to shape other people's lives.
In what ways is the Iniskim Centre involved in the community outside of the student body?
So we do co-host a couple of events throughout the year, cultural events like our round dance every spring and our powwow every fall. We support events that welcome in the community, like open house in October. We welcome community members and knowledge keepers that come in to provide knowledge to our students, both informally in visits as well as formally in the classrooms. And we welcome our community members in for ceremonies, chances for people to connect with culture and to learn about who they are. It's actually quite ironic in a way that for many of our Indigenous students, they're learning about their indigeneity in university, a place that they were once barred from going to. That irony is not lost on me, that we now have the capacity, and more than that, we have the moral calling to provide that experience for our students. This is where research, people like Dr. Michelle Pigeon write about the need for student success to include pride in culture, or to come out with a sense of cultural integrity as just as important as the parchment that they will receive. We want our students to be uplifted through their experience and to come out being proud of who they are in whatever way they identify.
So I understand graduation just happened. And to build on what you were just saying, how important is it to include those Indigenous ceremonies within graduation?
Very important. So when I arrived here in 2010, we would host a graduation banquet, and we would have all the graduates and their families together, and we could comfortably fit inside a room with a capacity of 80 people. Humble beginnings, but important. Today, we are able to celebrate hundreds of Indigenous graduates every year, and this is where the need for a special event for them exists. So for our students, they get to cross the stage at convocation like everybody else. That's important for them. But we also have a second event called our Indigenous Honoring Ceremonies, where we recognize not just our degree recipients, but also our bridging program students who completed their upgrading. We honor those students as well because for them, they didn't graduate high school. They didn't have that rite of passage to say you've completed high school, you're ready for post-secondary. And this is why our students say, this is my moment, I'm dressing up, I'm bringing my family, we're going to celebrate this. And then we get to see them again 4, 5, 6 years later when they cross the stage again with their degree. Many of the students that attended our ceremonies this year were either in the bridging program or they came through the bridging program. So there's a very strong connection to that program, to the center, and its place within the university. We gift our students culturally appropriate, in a culturally appropriate manner. So for our First Nations students, we gift them an eagle feather, a representation of love. And for our Métis students, we gift them a sash so that they can be proud of their identity as well. All of our students, when they receive their gift, they're then greeted on the stage. We have our president standing behind them on one shoulder. We have our associate vice president of indigenization and decolonization on the other shoulder. And together, they wrap a blanket around the student so that we send them forward with love in a good way as they go forward as graduates of Mount Royal.
What sort of pride do you feel when you get to watch a student you've helped complete that journey?
Well, I'm very proud because I feel like a parent in a way. These are my family. These are my children. Look at them go. Look at them thrive in this setting. And for whatever credit or thanks they offer to us, I always say, no, you did the work. You wrote the tests. You did the papers. It's your name on the parchment. But I'm happy to have been part of your journey. And there's nothing you need to pay back to us. Take what you learned from us and go out into the community and share your gift. That's your payback to us, to give it to other people. And students understand that very well. Almost every student I've ever visited with, when I ask them, why are you here? Why are you motivated to come to school? Very, very rarely does someone say it's about material, like I want to make money, I want to be successful, or I want to have my name in the spotlight. Almost every student I've asked that to has said, I'm here to learn something so I can bring it back to my people and help others. I am a vessel for this work. And that really speaks to our values, our collective values, that we're always trying to serve others or consider others in our words and actions. So that's why I love being part of this community, because our students, they get it. They get why they're here. And if they ever lose their way, they can always come back, and through a conversation or through a ceremony, they will renew themselves and rediscover their passion once again. Because university is a challenging experience. It takes several years. You're going to undergo transitions of many different kinds, challenges of many different kinds. And I share that with my students as well, to say, look, as a student myself, I've felt challenges. I've felt moments of, can I do this? And so I recognize that everyone will feel that. So we like to dispel those kinds of feelings, that Indigenous people sometimes bring into these spaces, these feelings of, well, people have been here for generations and they're embedded and I'm new. How do I find my way here? This is, again, another reason why we want to create a community on our campus, create spaces for our students to come together and talk to one another and find out, oh, you felt that way too? Well, I felt that way. Oh, okay, I guess it wasn't really that. After all, we just were a little bit nervous being in this new space, but everyone's nervous being in this new space. So it's a common feeling that we tend to hold it to ourselves, thinking it's just us that feels nervous or us that feels overwhelmed. So what we want to do is help our students see beyond the brick and the glass and the buildings, to see people, to build connections and relationships, so that they can center on those when they struggle, and let that guide them back to their motivation to return to class.
I think you've spoken on it briefly, but what does decolonizing education look like?
Yeah, these are three terms that have entered the vocabulary in the past 15 to 20 years. They've been introduced before, but really they're gaining a lot of momentum now. And again, it's through things like the TRC, through the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, which is seen as the framework for the TRC. These are all conversations that are leading us back to discover what our common purpose is. Yeah, so what we want to do is understand that these are three related terms, but they're all distinct. How the majority of our Indigenous scholars define these terms is that indigenization is an embedding process. It's weaving together and adding in. We use the concept of weaving because it implies a very strong connection rather than an adding on, which implies that the structure is still intact, but something has been added on that may or may not stick. So we want to think of indigenization as an embedding process or a weaving together process, which again, two-eyed seeing supports that of how we can understand Indigenous and non-Indigenous ways of knowing. Decolonization is a much more challenging work, because what it is looking at are the structures and symbols that are embedded within universities that do convey power, that do convey oppression, that do mean separation. And for many people, we are blind to those elements. We just take them for granted because we grew up around them and they're considered normal by us. So this is why when we say, and it still happens today in our classrooms, teachers are still saying that Columbus discovered North America 500 years ago, and before this was a wasteland that was empty, waiting to be discovered and developed. That's colonization. that is one voice that has excluded Indigenous voices. Decolonization explores where that voice came from, and to indigenize means to restore that voice back and to return a balance, like our ancestors foresaw when they were creating agreements. Reconciliation is seen as the work relationally, and it is seen as the burden being placed on non-Indigenous people to create space for conversations. What we say in our communities is that reconciliation will only advance when non-Indigenous people are initiating conversations. Otherwise, we are continuing to have the same voices, but speaking within closed circles. You're not going to advance as quickly or as effectively unless other people become allies and supporters. This circles back to that idea of the Iniskim Centre and how we're an open space for all students, whether they want to come in and meet people or get information for a project, or they want to become an ally and support us through events. There are other ways where we want to foster that sense of reconciliation. And this is the open-endedness of it. There is no strategic plan that can say by such and such a date it will be complete. We have to understand, as challenging as it is, we have a shared responsibility to go forward. And this is where we're guided by things like our 7 generations philosophy. So knowing that the last residential school in Canada closed in 1996, we could safely say that we are in the first or second generation post-residential schools. And look how much we've achieved as a nation since then. We've gone through a TRC. We have a national framework, and it's slowly being implemented into organizations across Canada. But there's still so much more work to do. This is what gives me hope as a parent. My children attend Mount Royal. One just graduated a few weeks ago. Another one is still here. What I like to see is the world that they're growing up in has evolved and improved from the days when I was a student. And likewise, it'll be their work to make things better for the people that come after them. So we always want to be proud of what has been achieved, but with a larger picture. We always say, okay, we're happy with what happened. Let's put our head down and work on the next goal. We never just stop and say it's done. We have 500 years plus of shared history to unpack, to reorganize, and to create a new framework. And these are the opportunities and the challenges we have in university. And it takes a tremendous amount of dedication, vision, and energy to see this through. But fortunately, we have that support from the highest levels of our administration. And that's why we feel comfortable doing this work, because we know that we're all in it together.
How can non-Indigenous educators help in allyship and holding that space?
That's a great question, and it's one that we struggle with because we need to understand where people are at and where opportunities lie. So recently we had a high-level leadership meeting on campus, and that question surfaced: who should be teaching Indigenous knowledge? Who has the rights to speak to sacred information? And the consensus here on campus is that non-Indigenous faculty, teachers, have the right to speak about Indigenous issues. They have to have a voice. They have to be able to bring this into their classrooms. Otherwise, they're left out, and they have a role to play in reconciliation. But when it comes to sacred knowledge, traditional knowledge, or lived experiences, that's where the separation lies, and that's where Indigenous faculty should have that right. They should be the ones that are speaking to what it's like to speak about intergenerational trauma, to speak about the impacts of the Indian Act on their family. Those are voices that need to be heard in the classroom, but they need to be authentic. They need to come from people that have lived those stories. So that's why we're working with our faculty to identify where areas for their growth lie, so that they can bring knowledge into the classroom. And ultimately, what we want to do is create pathways for those teachers to work with our elders, our knowledge holders, and our emerging elders who have the knowledge on campus. That includes our students. Many, many times our students will come back into the center and say, I was just taught a lesson about something and I know more than the professor does because that's my community, that's my people. And what can I do about this story? And I say, well, you can share your story in class, but this is also your opportunity to continue your education, get your master's degree, and come back and be the professor. That's the way you can make change on a larger level. So our students are seeing that now. They're seeing the opportunities around them. And when they come in and say, I'm interested in your diploma, I say, what about our 4-year degree? Have you thought about a master's after that? What about a PhD someday? What we want to do is upsell our students on their education. We want to help them see beyond the frontline entry positions. We want to support our students as they go into the boardrooms where they're the decision makers, the policy experts, the budget deciders. That's where we want to build capacity for our students to take their bachelor's degrees and continue to grow them, to see how their experiences will elevate not just their standard of living, but their impact on the people around them. My journey has been parallel to the students' journey. As they've been in school learning, so have I. And when they say they're inspired by me, I turn it right back and say, I'm inspired by you. I see how hard you work, and it makes me want to do the same thing. So this space is a place where we uplift each other, support each other, whether it's a program of study or cultural knowledge or finding oneself. We love to see that journey that our students take. And we know that when they walk out the door, they are transformed. What we want them to know is that in addition to them being transformed, they too have transformed this environment. They need to know that they do have influence and that what they say and do here does resonate with the people that work here.
Must be incredible to watch those glass ceilings shatter.
It is, and oftentimes people are unaware that they're standing on a glass ceiling. So we work with them in a kind and loving way to expose those blind spots, those gaps that exist, those assumptions that we hold. I'll give you an example of this. Several years ago, I had a teacher call me up. The teacher was frustrated. Tori, what's wrong with your students? Why don't they come to class every day? Why don't they submit their assignments on time? I'm very frustrated with them. And I heard the teacher and I said, okay, well, let's understand where those frustrations come from. So the best way that I can do that is show you. So let's get in my car. I'm going to take you to the Tsuut'ina Nation where I used to work. And I'm going to drive you around and I'm going to show you some things and introduce you to people. How does that sound? Well, the teacher was very uncomfortable by that idea, visibly uncomfortable. And I said, well, do you want to do this? And they said, no. I said, well, how come? Well, because I've never been there. And I don't know if people are going to be nice to me. I'm a visitor. And I said, now you know how the students feel when they're in your classroom too. And I saw the light bulb go off. And she said, I will not judge your students again. I didn't know that if the snowplow doesn't come by, they can't leave their home. I didn't know that their internet is spotty and inconsistent. I didn't know that they live 10 minutes away from me, but they boil their water. I didn't understand their needs. I need to humble myself and learn from them. So these are the teachable moments that can happen even amongst our professors. We need to sometimes unpack their assumptions and their biases. So that's what I share with our staff here when they are frustrated because, again, they're looking at it through one lens and not a two-eyed seeing lens yet. We want to build that capacity.
Now, I think you've spoken about it, but I was hoping maybe you could share a little more about the programs the Iniskim Centre offers.
Yes, and these were all, again, created and developed based on the needs of our students. So our first was the bridging program so that our students have an academic pathway. That was created by our elders, by our Treaty 7 and Métis Nation advocates. They wanted to create a space for students to come into post-secondary. They didn't always have their high school diplomas. They didn't always have their prerequisites. So let's create a space to do that. They visited the post-secondaries, and it was Mount Royal College at the time that said, yes, we'll partner with you. And this is why for many of our elders, the school holds a special place to them because they often attended here as well and refer their family members to us now. So over time, we've developed 3 other programs. One of them is our Indigenous housing program. This program is special because it supports not just single students on campus, but also families. So Mount Royal is very proud of the fact that we have right now on our campus 8 families that live with us. These families stay with us until they graduate. They live on campus year-round, and we have wraparound supports for them, from everything from what the students need to organizing birthday parties for the children. We have 23 children living in these units on a university campus. And again, those children symbolize reconciliation. They're living in a space they were once forbidden to be in. For me, the most powerful moment of that housing program, which has been here since 2008, was a day when one of the students was in the center visiting with staff. And while she was doing that, her 2 young boys were running around the center playing together. I would say at the time they were maybe 5 and 3. And they were alone together in the hallway. No one was around them. But I had my door open and I heard the older one say to the younger one, when I grow up, I want to go to Mount Royal University. I couldn't believe that. And when I came out, I found the mom and I said, you're not going to believe what I just heard your boy say. And she said, I know, he says it all the time. He wants to be a nurse. He wants to be like mommy. He wants to go to university. And we shared a good cry together because it was a moment to recognize just how special that experience for her and her boys are. And I have no doubt that someday they will be back as students. That is what we would call an unintended consequence. We knew that our students needed affordable housing. We knew that they needed access to university. But how could you possibly foresee the impact on children like that? So this is how we say education creates new cycles in our families, centered around education, centered around hope and prosperity. So for us, those children are all our children. We look after them when they're on campus. We look after them when they're in the center, and they represent the future. So they're very special to us. In addition to our housing program, we also have a medicine trail program. This introduces culture and vibrancy into our campus. I have to give a lot of credit to our medicine trail coordinator, Mr. Dion Simon. When Dion came into the center 13 years ago, he saw a space that had a body, it had a mind, but it didn't have a spirit. It didn't have culture. It didn't have medicines. It didn't have ceremony. And the first thing he said was, we need to create a space for our students to smudge, to celebrate, to heal. And so over the years, he's developed programs on campus, partnerships on campus, artwork and installations on campus. Dion has co-facilitated what we call the Kairos blanket exercise. This is an interactive exercise for people to feel what the Indigenous experience has been for the past 500 years. It's an extremely powerful, moving experience. Dion has delivered that over 150 times on campus. Over 3,000 people have been impacted by that experience, and non-Indigenous and Indigenous included in there. So the scope of that program is enormous. And this is why when students want to meet with an elder, they'll contact Dion or schedule him for a blanket exercise or to go outside and set up the teepee together. You learn best when you're actively involved. And so for our students to set up a lodge, for many of them, they'll say, that's the first time I've set up a teepee. And I didn't do it until I came to university. Again, the irony is there, but it's our opportunity and we embrace that. So culture is very strong on campus and Dion is critical to that. Our fourth program would be our student success program. This links our students with academic supports on campus, our partners in student learning services, for example, with workshops, with tutoring. We teach our students how to be students. No one comes into university knowing how things work. And many of our students are on a journey to discover who they are. And we understand that that also means that many students will be passionate about a different program throughout their studies. We know that over half of our students will change their mind. So when we have a conversation with them, we let them know it's okay to find yourself here. It's okay to start in one program and move to another program. You are in a space where you have control. You make the decisions. We're here to support you and explain things beside you. I very much, as a teacher, want to empower my students so that they learn how to do the things they need to be successful. And when the day comes that they do it for themselves, then I know that we've had a role in that. And we ask them to share what they've learned with other people. Again, that's how our knowledge continues to grow, is to witness, to keep that moment alive and to share those moments with others. So in that vein, I'm thrilled and honored to be able to witness and to share some of those experiences with you today.
Thank you. I'm just wondering, what are a few things you wish community members of Calgary and Alberta as a whole knew about the Iniskim Centre?
We would want them to know that universities are spaces that are learning. We're learning to undo some of the biases that we have built our campus around. We're learning to have difficult conversations, to unpack those things and to see them in a new way, and to invite people in to have agency and ownership over restoring our relationships as communities. We want our young people to know that they have an opportunity to come to school. They have the opportunity to create their future in ways that they could never have imagined. We want our parents to know that there is a space for them at the university, that they have the ability to influence their children through their actions. And for our mature students, we want them to know that there is a space for them here as well, that they can bring their knowledge and their experience in to share with other students that are on their journey. So education is accessible, and it is our goal here at the university to have equal representation outside our walls, inside our walls. This is why our programs have reserved seats for Indigenous students to ensure a minimum of 7% representation. So that's our goal, is we are overrepresented in certain areas of society. We are slightly underrepresented here in university. This is our call to action, to embrace this opportunity and to make change while you're here for yourself and for the institution.
My last question for you is, how important is it to topple the stereotype of the monolith of Pan-Indigenous?
Yeah, absolutely. We want to understand, we have teachings, presentations we offer to staff here. One of the first things is, hey, did you know there are 635 plus First Nations in Canada? They are all distinct in their own way, and they represent different language groups, different communities, different stories, different songs, different ceremonies. Once we start to appreciate the diversity across Canada, then we're in a space to accept and welcome that. One of the things that the past few years has taught us is that education is mobile and it's accessible in new ways thanks to technology. So this is where we're seeing students reach out to Mount Royal from further and further away because they're hearing about us, and they can attend us in person and live on campus, or they can attend virtually now. So to us, we're happy. We're proud of the work that's been done. We don't feel satisfied. We know there's still work to do. We humble ourselves when we start that work, and we invite others to join us here on campus as allies. So the message is education is here for you. We once lived in the subsistence economy where we hunted, where we gathered, where we grew, and we lived off the land. Today we live in the knowledge economy. Information is what guides us. And so we want to take that idea of education as the new buffalo, and your degree is your spear and shield. And that's how you will prosper and support your family in this generation.
I think that's all the questions I have for you today. Is there anything else you'd like to add?
Just that I'm very privileged to have been part of this opportunity, and thank you for helping us amplify the work of Indigenous people in universities and to help our prospective students see that there are spaces that we're here, we're waiting for you, we welcome you when you're ready.
Well, Tori, as an ex-Inuk Mount Royal student, thank you so much for all the work you do. Thank you to the Iniskim Centre as well for having us. That's it here at Local Lives.
Hey, Rich.
Hello. Today, Local Lives is joined by a special guest at the Iniskim Centre. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Good morning. My name is Maria Smalllegs. I am the Student Success Coordinator here at Iniskim Centre.
So what does your position entail?
As part of my role here at Iniskim Centre, as Student Success Coordinator, I put together a calendar of supports that includes tutor support, program and services supports, instructor office hours, and I put it on an online calendar so our students know what's going on the daily. If there's any student success seminars that are offered in our boardroom, and who's going to help them academically here in the center on a daily basis. As part of my role, I also do the BMO Indigenous Peer Mentorship Program. So there I do 2 days worth of training for our onboarding of mentors, and those would be our second, third, and fourth year students. And they mentor any first year student and also mentor our Indigenous University Bridging Program students as well. So we do culture as part of our programming. We do academic supports, and these mentors are a trusted advisor, both academically and personally. So we try to foster those relationships for retention and transition into their program of choice, whatever they decide they want to get into.
How long have you been working here?
This past May was 5 years I've been working here. So I mean, every day is a new learning experience because, of course, we're trying to tailor programs for our students and tailor the supports for our students. So oftentimes if our students ask, that they need certain supports in different areas, I'll reach out to the faculties and ask if they can send someone to come to the Iniskim Centre to provide tutor support to our students.
Happy anniversary.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, 5 years for sure. It's a good job. I like it.
How has the center here grown in the 5 years you've been working here?
Well, prior to my arrival, like 2 months to my arrival, they moved into this space. So it's quite accommodating. I enjoy the fact that it's open, it's inclusive of everyone, not just our Indigenous students, but that it's a one-stop shop for our students. So all services throughout campus come and offer time here in Iniskim Centre, inclusive of wellness services. So we have psychologists that come in here and book their appointments, so our students don't have to go to wellness services. Career services comes down here and offers supports by way of seminars, and of course just office hours to try and encourage our students to utilize their support up there. And then, of course, because they have the availability to help our students secure employment too. So we try to encourage all different kinds of faculty and support staff to come through the Iniskim Centre and help our students.
What inspired you to start working at the Iniskim Centre?
Well, I've previously worked for Mount Royal in the past, and then when this position came available, I had just come out of health, so I had done education, then I did a few years in health, and then this position came available, and I thought, education is a good place. I enjoy working with the students. They're really the best part of my job is working with the students. It's nice to see our students be successful and transition into their programs and then, of course, graduate, right? And I've got to see a whole cohort of students do that, so I enjoy that.
Must be pretty special.
It is. I mean, not only do I run the mentorship program, but I've also mentored students too, right? So for them, it's the availability to come and talk to me about anything, both academically and personally. I try very hard to support whatever needs they have. And even if that means reaching out into the community to support them, we'll do that too.
Did you have access to a center like the Iniskim Centre when you went through your own education journey?
Well, when I first started, Mount Royal was a college. So no, IUBP, our Indigenous University Bridging Program, was then called the Aboriginal Education Program. So I started out in that program and did academic upgrading. Then I did the 2-year university transfer, and I ended up at U of C for my degree.
It must be pretty special then to come back and work for the center.
Back then we didn't have a center. I mean, we had to use the resource centers that were here for all students. There was no Indigenous center. So to come back here so many years later and see all the supports that were already here, and my predecessors too did a great job as well, right? So for me to come into this role, it was quite easy. And of course, like I said, I thrive around students, so it's a good experience to be with them. But no, during my educational experience, there was no Iniskim Centre here at MRU. So this is a great resource for our students.
How can the education system better hold space for Indigenous students?
By having, something like this for our Indigenous students at any university. We want to support our students the best way that we know how. And of course, that's academically, right? But, personal issues come on and students explain to us what their issues are. And of course, we try to service them. And I don't think that if there wasn't a center, that we wouldn't be able to do that as well as we do right now.
How can non-Indigenous students better hold space for Indigenous students?
I think it's important because our Indigenous students never had an opportunity to share in the past, or else they didn't feel comfortable to share in the past. So now in classroom, I think in a time of reconciliation, it's really important to have our students have an opportunity to share, to inform our students about our history, our background, our culture, so that they have a better understanding of what it meant to be an Indigenous person historically, and what it means to have culture and to have themselves honored as an Indigenous student today.
Now you've spoken on it briefly. I'm just wondering how important it is for Indigenous students to have this sense of community within the student body.
Well, here in Iniskim Centre, I think we pride ourselves on community. We're very inclusive of our students. And of course, here in Iniskim Centre, it's about well-being as well. So this is a safe space, not only for our students, but our instructors, a safe space for them to come in and feel that they can be authentically themselves. And they allow me to be authentic as well. And I'm very appreciative of that, because then we have a relationship built on trust, reciprocity. It's a good thing.
Do you have any advice for any Indigenous who are looking to attend post-secondary?
Well, I think never stop learning. I don't believe that it's You can go to school at any age. I think it's important if you want something to strive for your goals. I think it's important to understand where you're going in life and what post-secondary education can do for you. A lot of times it's, students are now just coming towards education. They may be the first ones in their family to graduate. So I think they know that this is their opportunity to do well, their opportunity to move forward, and also model student success, not just for themselves, but for their families and friends.
To build on that graduation, I know MRU just had its graduation.
We did.
How important is it for Indigenous students to have that, like the ceremonies included in the graduation?
Well, first, I want to be very clear. I also encourage our students to do convocation as well, because I think it's important that they walk the stage and that they show to other non-Indigenous folks that they can be just as successful. But to have an Indigenous grad specifically for them is very important, because we honor our students not just the sake of saying, that you've graduated from your program, but we do specific ceremonies for them and acknowledge that they've done very well in school, that they can now move on and do something even more. They could go for their masters and their PhDs if they choose to. But I think it's important that we acknowledge the fact that our Indigenous students have a graduation, whether it be through our Indigenous University program, because maybe they didn't graduate high school. So it's important to have that, again, a reflection for their families and self. But historically, our educational experience was never a good one. So to come to Mount Royal University, having an Indigenous graduation specifically for them, I think is important moving forward and continuously moving forward.
How impactful is it to watch these students you've helped complete their journey?
It's very impactful. I know I try to put in all of the supports in place for our students so that they can be successful, and I'm just a small facet in their educational journey. It's a great experience. I emceed our graduation, and, I had to acknowledge the fact that our students need the support. They want the support. They're encouraged by us. So they feel safe. They feel welcome. They feel like they want to give back to their community as a result of coming here. So for me to see them cross the stage or come and be acknowledged in our ceremonies is delightful. I take a small bit of credit because, of course, they're the ones doing all the hard work. But if I can support them in any way that I can, I will.
Thank you. How can non-Indigenous professors and educators better elevate Indigenous voices and hold space for these students?
I think our profs are doing a pretty good job right now. We are in a time of decolonization and indigenization here at the university. So we're in a process of making change. I think that our instructors try very hard to give space because I think they too are learning as well. They're not as knowledgeable about our history as our Indigenous students are, because they know their history. They understand where they came from. They know their culture. But for our profs, sometimes it's an experience of reciprocity. They're learning too from our students.
What does decolonizing education look like?
Well, like I said, our history and education wasn't a good one with the Indian residential school. So to decolonize education is to allow our own stories to come forward. A lot of our culture is an oral tradition. So some of our own teachings to come forward and be reflective in the classroom. But like I said, I think it's important that to decolonize these courses is to give a little bit back to the community and to our Indigenous students. And like you said, to hold space for them, right? Because that's important. But from a bigger academic perspective, it's changing curriculum. It's allowing for different language courses, Indigenous language courses. So, it's definitely a work in progress for sure.
How important is representation within academia for Indigenous students?
Well, a lot of our Indigenous instructors and professors hold space here in the Iniskim Centre because they know it's a safe space, and our students feel a little bit more able to have discussions with them here as opposed to maybe going to their office and having discussion there because, they feel like it's a community here and our instructors are part of that community. And I think to see themselves in education, like from a professor, to see a professor that is Indigenous, that they too can aspire to be that.
In what ways is the Iniskim Centre involved in the community outside of Mount Royal?
Well, we do a lot of different initiatives through our elder supports here on campus. We do Journey to Indigenization during the course of the September and October to reflect the time of Orange Shirt Day, to understand MMIW. So we invite a lot of community to come in. And I also co-chair Native Information Exchange with the City of Calgary. So this is where a lot of Indigenous programs and services come together every month. And we discuss what kind of supports are out there for not just our students, but any and all Indigenous people here in Calgary. So it's a level of reciprocity back and forth and sharing. And then, of course, a lot of these different programs and services that we discuss during Native Information Exchange can also be opportunity for our students by way of employment. Practicum allows them to reach out to these different Indigenous supports in Calgary to see if they'd be willing to take on students. And a lot of our students do a lot of the self-advocacy for themselves. So it's good for them to understand what's out there in Indigenous community for them.
What are a few things that you wish community members knew about the Iniskim Centre and what it offers Indigenous students?
Well, if you've never come to the Iniskim Centre, I encourage people to come. We often do many tours. We have a lot of remote communities from the north that come through here. And of course, a lot of Indigenous folks in Treaty 7 themselves. I think it's important to understand that we're very passionate about what we do here. We want our students to be successful. So we work very hard to support them in whatever ways possible. Because, of course, education is not just academic, but it's a lifelong learning experience. So we're inclusive of those kinds of things. And we understand that, our students have some trials that they need to work through. And if we can assist them to do that, I think it's important. But to understand that we try to incorporate all of the services here at Iniskim Centre, and we take from all of the extending services amongst campus to come through here to support our students. So it's not just academic, it's social, it's wellness, it's mental wellness support. We kind of pride ourselves in saying that it's kind of like a one-stop shop here at Iniskim Centre, that we try to incorporate all of the services here for our students.
How big of a role in quality of life and education do those other services play?
Well, I think especially with wellness, because we have doctors here on campus and we have mental health support. And I think that's really important too, that we offer those services to our students so that they don't have to go off campus to seek the supports, that they're built in. They're right here for them. All they have to do is utilize the service, right? So again, it's important that our students know what's here, what's available for them. And then, of course, we try to also encourage other entities to come through here. We've had different organizations come and provide our students with employment opportunities, summer employment opportunities. But to have all of those services come through here and have our students be able to identify, oh, this is so-and-so from the library, this is so-and-so from career services, and start building those communications with them, I think it eases them, makes them feel like it's not such a big task because they're having those impromptu conversations with all these other entities. And then when they finally realize, well, I need to utilize that service, it's not as hard because they've already met the person. They've already feel like they understand what they're trying to do here and how they're trying to support our students.
Thank you. I think that's all the questions I have for you today. Is there anything else you'd like to add?
I just encourage our Indigenous populations here in Southern Alberta and the rest of Treaty 678 and all of Canada, come join our community here at Mount Royal University.
As a former Mount Royal student myself, just want to say thank you for all the work you do.
Thank you.
That's it for us at Local Lives. Hello, welcome to Local Lives. We're back at the Iniskim Centre with another special guest.
Yes, well, okay, Nixikwa, Danse, Tawal, Duns Nasiga, Sun, Makui, Tapui, Standing Wolf, Ermineskin, Nayasquayak, Musquachis, Nitochin. My given English name is Dion Simon. I'm originally from Ermineskin, Treaty 6 territory, a guest and a visitor of Treaty 7, and it's an honor to be here today.
Thank you. Would you mind telling us a little bit about yourself?
Well, I was born and raised in Ermineskin, Musquachis, 200 kilometers north of Calgary. And my parents are residential school survivors, so my upbringing was on the reserve, and my home was it was dominantly residential school style in a way, but I attended school on the Ermineskin Reserve, elementary, junior high, and post-secondary. And I come from a large family. I have about 9 siblings altogether. And so my family live in Hobima. I came to Calgary 20 years ago, and I had met my wife, Oksqui Piksaki, Francesca Simon, here in Calgary as well. We were married 10 years ago. We had 4 ceremonies. We had a Blackfoot ceremony, we had a Cree ceremony, a Christian ceremony, and an Italian ceremony. So we were married 4 times. And my wife also works here on Mount Royal campus, and so we've been here. I've been here, and we've both been here in Calgary for the last just over the last 20 years, and it's our home now. I'm a part-time artist, oil painter, and extensively into recreation, athletics, and other types of hobbies. So yeah, and it's a little bit about me.
Thank you. How long have you been working at the Iniskim Centre?
I've been here for 11 years, and in those 11 years, I have been my main job has been working with the students that come through the Iniskim Centre, and working along with the First Nations, the Métis and Inuit students, providing that cultural support, some of those traditional supports that they're needing while here on campus, and along with that, attending and visiting classes on campus as well, and providing some cultural, historical context of Indigenous peoples. But the main part is my main role is working with the Indigenous students here. So 11 years is how long I've been here, and it's been a very quick 11 years. It's been very quite fast, yes.
How have you seen the center here grow in those 11 years?
Well, when I first came here, we were in a different location on campus, and in that location we had it wasn't as large as this venue here, and so we didn't have as many offices. We had a kitchen that was our ceremonial room. That was our feast room and our gathering place. And we had a small computer room for students to do their homework. And we didn't have as many offices. We had to share offices at one time We had to move tables and chairs around to clear out a room, to use a room. And then what we noticed is we saw a high application rate, a lot of students registering to become to be a part of the Aboriginal education program at the time. And so it was identified as a home away from home. And so we saw the numbers of our students climbing throughout in between their classes, at lunch hour, during their breaks. And so a lot of our students were attending Iniskim Centre and just hanging out. And over 5 years ago, this used to be the Academic Learning Centre, became available. And so we moved into the center here. And with a little bit more offices, the room that we sit in today now, it becomes our feast room, our ceremonial room. And we can have more of an occupancy within the walls here. A little more offices for students to do private work, to do their exam work. We have more computer space, and that opens up opportunities for gatherings, for a little bit more sharing traditions and stuff. So we're on the main floor, whereas prior to this room, we were on the second floor. So being on the main floor, we have access to the backyard. As you can see behind us, we do have our lodge in the back there, which is where we can go out and where we can do our ceremonies, our sharing circles, and of course, just to go out there and just to maybe take a nap if we need to in between the hard assignments and hard days. Yeah.
How important is it for Indigenous students to have access to something like this on campus?
Well, to have these types of resources and these facilities created and funded by funders to create this type of space for Indigenous students, primarily for Indigenous students, is key. It's a place that Indigenous students who are coming in from remote communities, neighboring provinces, do have a place recognized on campus that is designated for them, a place that they can come in between classes, and maybe even after work hours, if we have an after school event happening. And so it's a place that can be seen where they can come, put down their bag, just take off their coat, relax, engage with other Indigenous students, just have a good conversation. And it's a neutral place. It's a place where students can come, where they can feel connected. Here we create community. There's a very large diversity of students that attend here. Not only Indigenous students occupy this space. We do have non-Indigenous students that do enter into the center and just to sit and learn about what we do. So it is important for students to recognize that it is a place that they can come to. They don't have to worry about what they're saying, about what they're doing. A lot of the staff are open. We have open door policies. We're approachable, and they have access to a lot of the programs that are here, should they take part in those programs. So for our students to come from far away and to come to access into the center, it's a home away from home, and it's a place that they can feel comfortable with while they're university students here at Mount Royal.
Thank you. How can non-Indigenous students help hold that space?
We're of the belief of connection. We're of the belief of relations and building relations. There is a level of respect that a lot of the non-Indigenous students I identify and view and perceive the Iniskim Centre. A lot of from my in the 11 years that I've been here, the perception that I see is a lot of non-Indigenous students want to learn about the Iniskim Centre. A lot of students, they're a little shy from time to time about entering. They're not too sure what the center is about. I think holding it and keeping it the space that it was designed for is what a lot of non-Indigenous students identify it as. A lot of the non-Indigenous students also see it that it's an Indigenous space. They don't want to overtake it. They don't want to overcrowd it. They don't want to overutilize the center. And so we have usually about 1 or 2 non-Indigenous students that will come in and just sit with the staff, sit with the students. Maybe they're a friend of the students. Maybe they're a friend of the staff here. And the non-Indigenous students are looking at it in terms that it's a neutral place, that it's a place to learn culture, to learn a little bit more about the people, and to connect a little bit more with maybe perhaps tradition or ceremony, and learning a little bit more about the identity of the students attending here on campus. So I want to say overall, the non-Indigenous students identify it that it's identified as an Indigenous student resource. It's an Indigenous place for students to come and put down their bag, and that is in itself kept very, I want to say sacred, but it's kept with a lot of respect. Yeah.
Thank you. How can non-Indigenous professors better hold space in education for
instructors is to learn of the diversity, to learn about the demographics of the students that are attending Mount Royal, to sit and learn about the stories. We're a people that we like to share our stories. We like to share who we are. Instructors could benefit quite well to learn about each individual's stories. Not all Indigenous students have the same story. They don't come from the same backgrounds, but there's different stories. There's different skills. There's different talents. There's a very diverse set of skill set within their classrooms when it comes to practices, culture, history, and knowledge. Instructors would benefit to sit with their students to learn a little bit more about where they come from, the background, what they come into these walls and into these classrooms with, and why they're here. The main important is they are here for a legitimate reason, and to pursue that intention, to pursue that cause. Instructors would identify, what that cause is or what that purpose is, and seeing how they can be of a support to that student, whether it's adjusting to the city, whether it's adjusting to the timelines, whether it's adjusting to the constraints, whether it's adjusting to funding opportunities or funding barriers. For instructors and facilitators to sit with our students, they would learn a lot more of the backgrounds and where the students are coming from while there are students here on campus.
Can you describe the impact it has on you when you watch a student that you've helped complete their journey here?
Well, it's always very rewarding. And when it comes to convocation, when we're 2 months out of convocation, there's a little bit of excitement. There's a little bit of withdrawal. There's a little bit of sadness. There's a little bit of anticipation, and there's a little bit of memory. And a lot of the students are looking at not only looking ahead to convocation, but looking what they've learned here within the classrooms, the relationships that they've built here in the Iniskim Centre, some of those deep, meaningful conversations that they've had with the staff here and the tutors. And so, as the students are convocating, as I look at the graduates, it's all of the hours that have been that we've sat down talking together. It's all of the hours and times that we've provided that support. It's the number of ceremonies, cultural gatherings that we've planned, organized for them to be a part of, and the number of elders, knowledge keepers that we've offered for them to sit with, to take that knowledge. And so when we see them on convocation day, when we see them walk the stage, and when they're receiving their parchment or their eagle feather or their blanket, it's all of those moments. It's every hour. It's all of those steps have been so worth it for them to achieve and to capture that moment, their time here as a student, as a graduating student. And it was all worth it. It was all worth it. So it's rewarding. I feel a deep sense of praise. And I say to myself, our leaders are here as learners of yesterday. Now they're teachers of tomorrow. And, they're our future. So here's our future. Our future is here. Yeah.
How important is it to include those ceremonies with the graduation for Indigenous students?
It's home. Ceremonies, part of our ways of life, are deeply ingrained, deeply rooted into our tradition and culture as people. And in our graduation, it's identifying and understanding that that after 4 or 7 years of being a student, it's recognizing them. It's putting them in the spotlight and recognizing them for their accomplishments, for what they've offered, for what they sacrificed, and for where they've come. To have ceremony, a part of convocation, is ceremony is part of the not only the way of life, but it is a rite of passage. It provides a strengthening. It's part of that launching off. To have ceremony is that transition phase from that rite of passage into their next adult stage. And ceremony is the spiritual practice of providing that spiritual support, and as well the cultural support, but of course the individual support. And ceremony is it's a sacred practice that is with them, in heart and in spirit, as they're walking into their field, and as they're having that exploration and that experience within their field. So, knowing that they have that support behind them. So very important to have ceremony. That is a very important piece of culture and who they are, whether they're First Nations, Métis, or Inuit.
Thank you. Do you have any advice for any Indigenous looking to go to post-secondary school?
For any Indigenous students to pursue education, is supports are here. Opportunities are here. They're present in all educational institutions. Any university or college setting, supports for Indigenous students are available, and they're present. And looking at that, any academic support is there should they need that, any type of cultural support. We're in the year 2023, and from my understanding, there are institutions that provide a lot of the supports for Indigenous students. And there's not only academic support, but there's counseling support, there's spiritual support, elder support, tutor support. There's access to a lot of the resources here on campus, and most universities are now becoming culturally understanding, culturally competent, and providing those necessary resources for Indigenous students. Universities are now looking at what is indigenization. We're almost now into 10 years looking at truth and reconciliation, and having truth and reconciliation, bringing that as a topic into some of the teachings, conversations in universities, and then looking at the history. And so Indigenous students are now looking at being recognized. The histories, the background are being discussed and talked about. It's not a number anymore, but an individual, a human being in institutions.
Would you mind sharing a little more about what indigenizing the university setting looks like?
Well, not always an easy question to answer. When we've when we've identified indigenization, we also look at decolonization and looking at some areas that could be decolonized in terms of a Western model. We're not talking about coming to the university wearing moccasins and wearing braids or wearing, your buckskin to class. What we're looking at is there's a type of teaching, a cultural teaching that Indigenous students are very, very familiar with. There's a set type of presenting content. There's a way of presenting structure from an Indigenous lens, Indigenous practice. When we look at indigenization, it's presenting those ways of facilitation through an Indigenous practice that our students feel connected to. When that takes place, our students excel mentally, they excel emotionally. Practice is being administered or it's a practice here on campus, and they're feeling a little more connected with home. And so whether that might look like a new professor having some background with Indigenous peoples, that's indigenization. If we take a look at forming our chairs in a circle when we're having a deep discussion about a certain topic in a classroom, that's indigenization. If we have a classroom out in the back here within our lodge, that's indigenization. And so it brings it closer to home for our students. There are other areas that we can take a look at indigenization and what indigenization might look like. But those are just a few examples when we say indigenization.
Thank you. What sort of events are the Iniskim Centre involved with outside of Mount Royal?
We do connect with a lot of community resources and a lot of Indigenous resources. And we sit and listen to them as to what they're doing in their organization and how their practice could be an asset or a benefit for a lot of our Indigenous students. So we bring sometimes the community into Mount Royal, or we go out to the community to listen to those members. We also, from the program that I run, the Medicine Trail program, we connect with a number of elders in the community. And with those elders, a lot of our students will attend ceremonies in the community. They'll sit down with those elders of the community and take part in those ceremonies. And our students will receive firsthand the teachings of those ceremonies with the elders. We also connect with elders that we bring into Mount Royal. And so with community, those elders, they bring in, they're very diverse. They bring in their knowledge and from a number of nations. And they share their teachings here with our students. We are very cautious and think about diversity. So my role would be to ensure that we bring in a lot of elders that suit the needs of our very diverse students or Indigenous students here. Some other events that we may take into out in the community is if there's a gathering, if there is a march for missing and murdered Indigenous women, if there are red dress marches or protests, we may be a part of that. And if perhaps on June 21st, we may take part in that. So maybe some representation. And if there is maybe a new flag raising, we may take part in that as a staff. whether it's a Treaty 7 flag or an orange flag for our children, will be a part of those events. So some representation in the community.
Could you speak more about the program you run?
The Medicine Trail program in Blackfoot is the Natusigo program, and it's been in operation for it's in its 13th year. And the cultural program was originally designed to provide a cultural component for Indigenous students that are attending the Iniskim Centre. And it is, some of those components in there are to offer, of course, elder support for students that are needing to speak with an elder or needing to talk with an elder, maybe just to sit with an elder and hear an elder. So part of that is we'll provide elder support. They'll provide also spiritual support. My role is to any students that are experiencing stress or frustration or maybe culture shock or maybe just the transition into the city, is to take a look at resources that they can access, people that they can connect with. Medicine Trail also, we provide a lot of the medicines here for students to smudge with. We do have a smudge room, a medicinal room for students to come to smudge. It's the only room on campus where we can light a smudge any time of the day. And students, they have access to it, no questions asked. And we have a variety of medicines for them to use and to cleanse with. With the Medicine Trail program, we do a lot of class visits. We do lots of class talks. We talk about cultural history. I work with 13 programs throughout the year, and I run numerous workshops for classes. And we, out in the back here, we'll set up about 25 lodges per year, and we work with about 200 plus students setting up our lodges throughout the year. And so on occasion, should students share or show an interest in medicine picking, every July we'll take some students out, we'll pick medicines. Part of my program is that we go out and pick sweetgrass and sage, and we pick enough to get us through for the year. That is for students to use and to have access to, and for students to take home should they need some. After going back home for Christmas, if they're going back home for reading week, they have a little bit for them to go with. And also as well, we provide consultation, we do advising. I do a little bit of spiritual advising. We do a little bit of Indigenous awareness on campus. We provide cultural instruction for instructors, for any type of groups. I sit on a number of committees to give that cultural lens. I talk a lot about cultural safety, cultural competency, cultural awareness, and of course an advocate for the Iniskim Centre itself. And I work with all the programs here in the Iniskim Centre. So I work with close to about 3,700 students per year, and so I figure I want to get that to the 4,000 mark, just to make it, 4 is a good number. So I don't know. No,
It's a good number. How important is it for Indigenous students to have access to something like a room to smudge during the school year?
Well, during those hard days, during the hard days, after a hard exam, after a hard class, when they know they have access to it, it brings a lot of relief. It brings a lot of calmness. It brings a lot of ease to the mind. It releases a lot of tension to the body. Releases a lot of tension from the emotions. To know that they have a place to come here and smudge, no questions asked. They feel that it's part of a haven, a place that they can come and just release and let it go, just to let it go. There's it's a room that they can utilize. They can take their time to sit in. They're not rushed. It's always respected. There are no rules. There are no policies. We're on a trust and honor system, and it's golden for the last 13 years. So for the students to know that they have access to it and it's theirs is always something that they feel comfortable and spiritually connected with.
What are some things that you wish community members knew about the Iniskim Centre and what's offered for Indigenous students?
Well, we are an academic resource. We're an academic support. That's one of our main, the large majority of the work that we do here is academic support. And we focus on academia and academics. Tutor support is what we provide a lot of. Making sure that students have all of their necessary links, connections, funding for classes. We ensure that the students know where they're going to access the classes. We provide that rule. If students are needing additional help in their assignments, we provide the tutor support. If students are feeling meltdown, if they're feeling a sense of loneliness, if students are feeling a sense of disconnection from home and from culture, maybe needing to gravitate and become grounded with ceremony or culture, that's what we also do. We do what we can on a university level. We're not a cultural center. We don't stick to one culture. We're an academic support. Culture, we provide the culture in there to help students build upon and to connect with in terms of that connection. So in a lot of that is students are for community is we look at connecting with the students. We sit with the students. We listen with our students. We listen to their stories. We offer any additional support that they're needing. Whatever that looks like. Sometimes we go above and beyond, and do what we can. And I think one of the best things that we have here is when our students, we had some of our male students wanting to attend a sweat lodge, and so they'll approach and they'll say, "Dion, I'd like to attend a sweat lodge." And I says, "Okay, well, there's one next week. You and I will go to it." And so not only will I direct students to a sweat lodge, I'll pack up my bag too. I'll put on my shorts and we'll both go into the sweat lodge and we'll sit there and we'll go over those protocols and we'll sit along with them. So my work doesn't only stop here, but it continues to go wherever the students may need to go. We have the belief that culture does not belong to us. We are caretakers of culture. Our culture it's a beautiful culture. And it's a beautiful practice. We see the importance of sitting down with community and talking and sharing about how to have respect for culture, but to have an understanding of what our culture is, who our people are, but also looking at understanding the history, some of the trauma, the injustices that Indigenous peoples have experienced for the last few hundred years, to have an understanding of where our people are coming from and where our people are living today, but to have an understanding of what part of that history that we're still living with, that we're still challenged with, and looking at that. That most of the time we're looking at who we are in terms of individuals, but looking at how do we grow, how do we nourish ourselves, how do we find that nourishment and that growth, how do we find that, how do we seek that out, and we can always be open to support. When we take a look at our history, if we are degraded, that's adding on to the history. If we are dehumanized, that adds on to that history. If we are belittled, that adds on to that history. If we have our dignity taken away to some degree, that adds on to that history. We always take a look at 7 generations for healing. I would like my grandchildren to have a sense of balance of mind, body, and spirit, a little more than what I was challenged growing up with. So, but to have that understanding of our people and our culture and our way of life and where we've come from, I think is something to be recognized.
Could you speak a little bit on the Kairos blanket exercise?
The Kairos blanket. I'd like to extend just acknowledgement to Kairos organization, who originally created the exercise over 25 years ago, with churches and elders who are survivors of residential schools. We've been teaching, facilitating the Kairos blanket exercise here on campus since 2014, to all levels of Mount Royal. We've facilitated and introduced the exercise to a number of groups on campus, to a number of classes on campus here. The exercise is something that we don't advertise. We don't promote it. We don't cold call or knock on doors. Would you like to take part in the exercise? It is the classes that come to us. It is the facilitators and professors that come to us and want to learn more about it. We give some context as to what the exercise is. We set up a time and a date to facilitate the exercise. And we go over the history of the last 500 years in chronological order as to the impact and the relationship between Indigenous and non-Indigenous peoples. To date, we have facilitated the Kairos blanket exercise here on campus with not only students, with not only groups and committees here, but with chairs. We've done it with instructors. And so we facilitated the exercise over 170 times to close to 5,000 individuals here on campus. The impact of the exercise has been overwhelming. It has been eye-opening for the participants. Some of our participants have shared that they did not know the history. Some have walked away saying, for our non-Indigenous participants, they've walked away with remorse. They've walked away asking, how can I be involved? How can I become involved? And we facilitate the exercise in such a way where we're participants walking away saying, I enjoyed that. It was hard to digest, but it was facilitated in such a way that I learned a lot. The pointing and the blaming and the shaming is what we don't do, because we know that never works. We have facilitators and volunteers who facilitate the exercise, only open to facilitating it many times that it is requested.
Thank you. I think that's all the questions I have for you today. Is there anything else you'd like to share?
From what I sense, that there is from our non-Indigenous students and non-Indigenous professors and profs, there's a lot of apprehension as to what Iniskim Centre is, as to what we do here. Our cultures, our ways of life are very complex. They're very diverse. Our protocols are very diverse, which leaves our non-Indigenous members kind of not too sure on how to approach things. We get a lot of questions on protocols. We get a lot of questions on how to do things culturally competently, how to do things culturally appropriately. The Iniskim Centre is always, we provide advice, guidance for Mount Royal. We're connected to a lot of events and social gatherings here on campus. And we lead a lot of a lot of those cultural initiatives and practices here. And we only look at offering what we know. We receive a lot of the guidance from elders, and what a lot of the elders encourage us to share is we practice that here on campus. So being dominantly Cree, I have a number of Blackfoot and Blood and Pagani elders that have been instrumental for me and some of those teachings, and to pass on to the non-Indigenous faculty and members here on campus. So in terms of what Iniskim does is looking at where we can be of help, where we can be of useful information, where we can be a resource, and where we can be of a good guidance.
What does cultural appropriation versus appreciation look like?
There are a number of things that identify cultural appropriation and appreciation. In a negative sense, we look at cultural appropriation as that action where one who is of non-Indigenous descent are using Indigenous imagery, Indigenous items for more of recreation, more of leisure play. Those sacred ceremonial items, which is not appropriate, and looking at how those items need to be seen as sacred and as well as respected, and cultural appreciation are the items that are sold as marketing items through authentic Indigenous First Nations, Métis, and Inuit peoples. Those items that are sold through stores, through vendors, through table setups and displays, anyone is more encouraged to purchase an item and to wear those with pride, to wear those in recognition of Indigenous peoples. That's a cultural appreciation. Also to those sacred items, to be left where those sacred items need to be seen and worn. That is also seen as cultural appreciation as well. So,
as a former Mount Royal student, I want to thank you for all the work you do,
mm-hmm.
and thanks for sharing with us today. That's it for us at Local Lives. Hello, welcome to Local Lives. Today we're still at the Iniskim Centre with another special guest. Would you mind introducing yourself?
No problem. Hello, everyone. My name is Melanie Parsons. I am the Housing and Events Coordinator here in the Iniskim Centre. A little bit about myself. I'm Cree Métis from Saskatchewan. However, I was born and raised here in Treaty 7, so pretty much most of my education, my post-secondary education, my career, and all the different things that I've done in my career have been mainly here out of Calgary. I've been with the center since middle of January, but before then, I was working in the admissions and recruitment office as the Indigenous recruitment specialist for just about 7 years. I'm also a graduate of the public relations program here.
How does it feel to now work at the university in the Indigenous Centre, having graduated from Mount Royal?
Yeah, I mean, with the time behind me here at Mount Royal, you can tell that it's special to me to be working here at Mount Royal University. I thought that it was a really positive time in my life when I was a student here, and I learned so much about myself and the world and people around me. And so that was sort of like the taste that was left in my mouth. And so I was thinking about it. And with the background of my mother, my family always saying, like, education's really important. It's uplifting and elevates your confidence. So I thought it'd be really great to come back and work for Mount Royal someday. And so I would say it was probably, I don't know, 5 years or so after I graduated that the Indigenous recruitment specialist role came up. And I thought, that's for me. I love it. I love going out to talk to youth and, you know, get them excited about stuff and get them believing themselves. And so I put my application in and was fortunate enough to be hired. And then I've just really enjoyed that work over the years. I got to travel all over Alberta, the different treaty areas, bit into BC, into Yukon, into Northwest Territories. And then randomly, I think it was sometime in December that we had received news, or we as in the admissions and recruitment office had received news that our former leader in this position, Jobin, was going over to SAIT. And so I thought about it and I was like, you know what? I've had a lot of time within the university, but working externally. And I think it'd be really great timing to come and work internally with the students, the faculty, and the staff and see what more I can do to grow, but also offer in that way. And it's challenging, it's rewarding. I have a really great team here in the Iniskim Centre, and they're forever challenging me and in good ways. And I think it's just a really special place to work in an environment where people are trying to improve their lives, to elevate their voices, just to have that different experience and just put themselves out there and try something.
Did you spend some time here at the Iniskim Centre as a student?
So I'm as old as the building. So it was actually a different location, but the Iniskim Centre may not have been this exact place, was in another location. And before the Iniskim Centre's birth, we had the Native Student Centre, and that was located in Wickham House. So I would say most of my education was using the Native Student Centre that at that time was still more or less run by Corey Cardinal. And then near the end of my education, the Iniskim Centre was born. And so, yes, I did use the services that were available to students. I volunteered for different programming that they were doing. And another great reason for why I ended up applying for this role, because I had that experience. And I thought, 10, maybe more years later, I thought, I think I have something to offer. So, yeah.
Has it played a big impact on your role?
Yeah, definitely there'd be an impact for sure, because people are helping you and they're guiding you, they're directing you, right? And in another case, when I called up for the admissions and recruitment position, some of the people were still here and they remembered me as a student. So it was nice to still have that ongoing community there, and the encouragement that was there 10 years ago still being there 10 years later. And so I definitely feel like it all plays a part and piggybacks off itself, right? Just having that boost of support over the years and during really difficult times when I was in my early 20s, and just having the support staff in that center, or I should say centers, helped me to get to those next levels of growth and being an adult and recognizing, okay, I have accountability here, I have responsibilities, I can see where I can go and I want to get there. So,
thank you. How are you involved with the community through the Iniskim Centre?
Well, as the housing and events coordinator, I've learned that you're out there. So let's break down what my role is as I understand it right now. I know that the previous coordinator really built a lot while they were here for their 7 or 8 years. But simplified, I'm responsible for helping with the planning of the recent Indigenous honoring ceremonies. I support the Students Association with the big round dance that we have. Coming up in the fall, we have a graduation powwow. In September, we also have our Journey to Indigenization events, so presentations, acknowledgements, marches, on shirt day, red dress. So I play a part in all of those. So I would say that I'm definitely involved with the internal Mount Royal community. And then how that reaches to the external community is getting to know the people that come in, the elders that we would use or often come in for their guidance, their prayers. If we have drum groups come in, if we have hand drummers come in, and so on. So you do really see that going out there further and further into Tree 7 community and getting to know people this way. And then with the housing piece, we have 8 units on campus here that house families, Indigenous families. And in that way, we're celebrating birthdays every month, at least twice. So 12 and out, 12 and under. We go to supper, we visit, I guess, fun places out in Calgary. And then we also, when required or when called upon, would have ceremony as well for our families. And so another access to our Indigenous community externally.
How important is it for Indigenous students to have access to services and events like those?
I think it's critical. One message I always have for those students when I would go visit the community and speak to high school students, other young adults at career fairs out there, would be, it's tempting to go start something and feel like you're just going to get in there and get out. And then you realize, like, life just keeps going. The tough stuff keeps happening. Life doesn't stop. Difficulties don't stop just because you're a university student now. They keep coming. So if you're not reaching out, if you're not asking for help when you need it, if you're not even just coming to a place that you can sit down and enjoy, you know, a beautiful view and a lunch in a quiet space, or sharing in similar laughter and type of humor, it can really catch up to you. And before you know it, you're ready to quit. You're ready to walk out on your own dreams, because shocking how challenging it can be. But when you have centers like Iniskim and you have programming, that catches a lot of students when they're getting to that point. And in some cases, students, prospective students, have been lucky enough that they're coming from families that are really speaking to that same messaging and involving them ahead of time. So the sooner that students, the younger they are, can reach on their own community, their school, and get involved, the better. So that when you walk into a big institution, a place like Mount Royal University, University of Calgary, SAIT, and so on, you're more comfortable to have those conversations, to approach those centers or those people in those positions, so that when you do need it, they're there to help you.
What sort of impact does it have on you when a student that you've helped completes their journey here at Mount Royal?
Because I'm new to the internal work, let me speak to my experience in admissions and recruitment. And when I would randomly have someone stop me in the hallway and say, "Oh, it's because of you I got into that studies or social work," it is huge impact. And you know, it feels great to see people go from like, "Oh, I can never do this," or "Nobody at home is supporting me to do this," or "My grades are abysmal," to, "Oh my gosh, there's so much upgrading I have to do. I don't know if I can do this," or "I don't know if I can afford it. I don't have this." You know, I used to hear it all at my desk. But then when you can coach those people through and support them, and then all of a sudden you see them here and they're thriving, it is a really great feeling. And there's one thing to get people through the door. It's centers like this and the programs that we offer out of the Iniskim Centre that keep people here working on their programs, or making them feel comfortable to acknowledge that maybe I didn't start in the right journey or right path. Maybe business isn't for me, and maybe I want to go into science now. So having people to speak to you through that change, through whatever that looks like, I'm sure is an equally good feeling too, when you see somebody that you know, thought they would never end up there, are now here in hallways with their backpack going from class to class.
On another note, we know graduation just happened. I'm wondering, can you speak to the importance of holding Indigenous ceremonies at both high school and college graduations?
Mm-hmm. I remember approaching this in, I guess, my speech at the Indigenous honoring ceremony this past May, and just seeing all the family out in the audience, and then also having the viewpoint of all of the proud graduates sitting there with their feathers, their sash, their blanket, and the pride, the joy, the sense of accomplishment, and I can do this. And then having their grandparents, their parents, their support workers, their children, their grandchildren, who knows, right? Because students are of all ages. I think it is so important and such a beautiful experience that you could give a student and their family. And of course, it makes staff feel like, pretty good too. But I think a lot of people might not ever have that opportunity again where they're involved in a ceremony like that, where they are maybe just learning for the first time the significance of receiving the eagle feather or an elder giving you your sash and the blanket ceremony and so on. And so I think that it's an opportunity to have a cultural experience that is meaningful, that is beautiful in nature and uplifting. I think the optics of it and the view of it is really important. It's like representation, the importance of it. So seeing your mom or your dad up on stage, completing their education or going into the next level, there's just so many to it that are just, it's a no-brainer. It's really important. And I hope to see more and more schools, even elementaries, high schools, post-secondary, certificate programs offering these ceremonies, because I think that it goes beyond that day to a lifelong memory, and something that you can share down the road and with the community.
What does holding space for Indigenous students look like in education?
I think that the more that we work on this journey to indigenization, and the less that we hold on to ideals about what the classroom should look like or conversation should be, and the less fear that we hold on to, would create respectful spaces where we can, as an Indigenous person, share our opinion in class in a safe manner, that it be an opportunity for people to learn from students, to learn from professors, to be able to look at the world in a different way. And that's what we're here for, is it not? Like, to educate ourselves, to open our minds, to learn about the different perspectives out there. So making sure that we have centers, that we have specific programming, that we have Indigenous professors teaching courses, not just Indigenous courses, all courses, that we support the voices of our students, but we don't expect them to be, Indigenous Studies Professor 101 in their classroom in the 1 minute that they speak of. I think it makes it a safer space and experience for all. So it is important that we have not just those things, but the variety of events that happen throughout the year and in these spaces, and give people those opportunities to experience for themselves, to be in the moment, to learn from another, and to just like take that deep breath and feel like I belong here, or I'm okay to learn from a different perspective and way of doing things, and I'm not unsafe by doing so.
How can non-Indigenous students be better allies within the school system?
Oh, it's so great to see how we returned to Mount Royal after graduating in 2008. The differences, and what I mean by that is the messaging from our Iniskim Centre itself, from the wider community, that, hey, the events are not just about us, right? Come to our powwow, come to our round dance, participate in our march, in our orange shirt, t-shirt wearing it, because it's not just issues that affect us, it's affecting all of us. Sometimes you hear that we're all treaty people, right? So we're all affected by the things that hurt us and hold us down. And so it's really nice to be able to come back all these years later and see so many non-Indigenous students participating, or faculties building it into their curriculum, into their classroom, into the work that the students do, and introducing them to our center, some of the events. I know there's a lot of work that goes on in child studies, nursing. So there's athletics saying like, hey, how can we participate? How can we support? And it's really nice. And I think it's a solid experience for those students. And so it's great when you walk into this place and it's not just, Indigenous students using the space. It's coming in here to learn, to be, and to learn from other students. So, yeah.
Pretty encouraging.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's the messaging is like, it's, come and learn, come and be with us, come get comfortable. Because what we're not trying to do is make people feel comfortable with decolonization. We're not trying to make people feel terrible about themselves. We're trying to improve relationships. We're trying to show that what we have to say and what we have to teach is going to only something that supports you and makes you a stronger person as well, as a non-Indigenous person.
How important is it for students, especially Indigenous students, to find a sense of community while on campus?
Community-based question is in like having a support network, having somebody to reach out to when you just don't understand a process or why something is the way that it is, when you need advocacy, right? When you don't feel like I don't quite yet have the voice for myself. So when you're out there building your community, even beyond the Iniskim Centre, and you're going to the academic advisors, you're going to career centers, you're going to all those different departments and the events that are put on by students. It really, I remember this, that was my first year in public relations. The professor really stressed the importance of my network. And I think at like 21 or 22, I'm like, what do you mean? I just know my friend group right now. But when I reflect back on that, these weren't just students that I went to school with. These are now people that I've been interviewed by, hired by, I'm collaborating with in the community. When I mentioned earlier with, the Iniskim Centre was in a different location, some of those staff were still there today, here, remember me from there. So again, network, community. And then when Indigenous students and non-Indigenous students are working together and non-Indigenous students are able to go home and challenge the things that are being spoken about in their homes or the way that they are out there in the community, I think it does really good work. I mean, I'm not going to be unrealistic and say that there's not sometimes harm that comes from it, and sometimes pushback, and sometimes it can be, isolating, or like you can sometimes feel alone in that important work. But having a community that is fluid in that way, where an Indigenous person can go to a non-Indigenous event and non-Indigenous come into the Indigenous Student Center, I think creates a stronger bond and a stronger community in general.
What are a few things you wish the Alberta community as a whole knew about the Iniskim Centre?
Sometimes I would hear, oh, I didn't even know that there was an Indigenous recruitment specialist. I didn't even know that there was a housing program at Mount Royal. I didn't know about, and it goes on, right? And then you can see a big difference to students that do know about these things, that were encouraged to look them up, or, somebody did go out of the way of what they would normally have to do for somebody and look those things up themselves, and then gave that information to a prospective student or a current student. It changes people's worlds. And so I think it's really important that not just for Mount Royal, but people be aware that it's a different time. And there's really a lot of support out there for Indigenous students in post-secondaries, even in high school, much more than I ever remember being there for myself. So being familiar with those supports, those community programs, I think is just, again, it's not just an Indigenous, non-Indigenous thing. It's Alberta, our community here in Calgary, and so on. So really promote these programs. If you're not sure if there's any, Google. ask the question. We'll pick up the phone and let you know about our program. We'll send you information. So I think ultimately what I'm saying is really promote the supporting programs that are within post-secondary institutions beyond the tutors and the academic stuff, because it's not just a singular experience that students are having here at university. They're growing up here. They're sometimes experiencing their first breakups or their first challenge within a classroom with ideals and culture shock and so on. So I think by just promoting those places in schools like the Iniskim Centre can just really do a world of good for a lot of people.
Thank you. I think that's all the questions I have for you today. Is there anything else you'd like to share?
Just a little bit more about the role that I'm in as the Indigenous Housing Events Coordinator. There are a lot of barriers to not just Indigenous everyone, but the barriers are huge for Indigenous people. And one of those would be housing. And so Mount Royal University was pretty much the first post-secondary institution of its size to offer the Indigenous housing program. And so actually, I was like the guinea pig for the program. I think it was back, 2007-8. It was the first time that they had this program starting, and they had these bursaries, and they even had this entire floor of the West residence where it was all Indigenous students living under one roof at a reduced rate. And I thought it was incredible because university is really expensive. And so having that bursary, which was basically a reduced rate on my rent, was really helpful that way. But then it was also a good way for me to get introduced to other Indigenous students here at Mount Royal. It's changed drastically since those days, but we still do the bursary program where we offer a reduced rate to at least 28 students. It rolls over in the case that you're doing well, that you're making an effort. In some cases, students leave, they graduate, they decide it's not quite their time to be here, or if they're moving on to another institution, we will award a bursary to a new student. So that, I think, is the smallest part of it. I think the most important part about communicating that Mount Royal University has an Indigenous housing program is the piece where each month I put on outings, whether we are going for dinner and a movie, we're going to a hockey game, maybe we're putting on some type of ceremony, face painting, cleansing, whatever. That is the community. That is the way that students can come out and get to know this place in a different way beyond the classroom and their professor and studying, right? So having that connection to the center, having the reduced rate, puts some money back in pockets and makes things slightly less stressful. But it's also a great way for students just to shake off some stress and go out there and have fun. Some new friends. We just know the city because a lot of people are coming to Calgary for the first time. You know, a lot of things that we don't consider are big deals for people. Riding the train, transit, them taking a bus, just seeing in a big city. So a program that kind of introduces you to that all and see through that, I think is really key for a lot of people that are looking at schools out there and where they want to attend. So us having an average classroom size of around 32 students, that you can walk down this whole campus in like 20 minutes, that you have a housing program, really begins to build that home feeling or that like this community. And then also having our Indigenous family housing program where we have a cluster of 8 homes. They share a yard. We have picnic tables and other furniture, bike racks, sandbox. We have a family lodge or teepee. I think that is another big draw for students coming to the school because that's quite a significant savings for single mothers and fathers, people that are caring for more than their children, maybe they have their parents, if they're elderly parent with them. So being able to offer us a good place for people to live here on campus where they can easily access the library, the pool, the gym, someone like myself who can guide them when they're not quite sure about something, is a pretty big deal. And I think that's why it's been such a successful program over the years.
I bet those with families really appreciate that.
Yeah, I think that's been a good eye opener for me too, because that was a new component. Before it was just like a bunch of us getting a bursary, living on the same floor. We were all living in single housing. We didn't have dependents, right? And so we would be sharing a 4-bedroom condo. And now it's really grown, thank you to so many great donors out there, to having 2 and 4-bedroom units where they can bring their children and live. And so some of our households have up to like 6 children, 7 children living in there. And, giving that, having the ability due to our donors to plan birthday outings and be able to do that's been a really nice addition to the program, and that growth that I've seen since being a student and coming to work here over the last couple of decades. Now, in 2008, I graduated. I was in admissions recruitment for 7 years, and I've been here for about 5 months. But yeah, no, it is really special. It can get pretty hectic, and that's exactly it. You can see when you're trying to be a full-time university student and raise a family and everything else life has to offer you. I think it's nice that you're part of this program that is going to support you even just by a dinner out or a birthday party planning. So yeah, I think it's special. I think that a lot of the families really feel supported. They feel comfortable. They feel like there's somebody that they can go to. If not, there's other staff that they can speak to. It's all about who students feel most comfortable with and how we can work as a team here at the Iniskim Centre to help students be successful.
I bet too those parties and outings are stuff those kids will remember for the rest of their lives.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, it's been special for me because you can get really wrapped up in yourself, in your own life, and then all of a sudden you're, at all like 2 birthday parties a month, and you're out there. Some people are tubing for their first time, skating for their first time. It's really special. So I think it'll be memorable for me. I think it should definitely be memorable for those kids as well. And, just a bit of a relief too for parents when they've already got so much going on to have that bit of extra support.
That's a huge barrier to help with
Previous leaders in this role, with growth in the program, with external donors really, opening their eyes to what decolonization institution looks like, how they can be more supportive of Indigenous people here in Alberta, Calgary, the local area, has, I guess, really created something pretty special.
Well, thank you so much for, sharing all the work you do here that you've done as a ex-MRU student myself. It really does go a long way.
Yeah, well, appreciate you for reaching out to the Iniskim Centre and wanting to hear more about what we do here and the community itself. And we thank you for sharing that with the wider community out there.
Well, that's it from us at Local Lives.